War will break out between France and the Fourth Reich. Europe will be divided, and Poland will be repartitioned in the process. This isn't anyone saying this. This is the former president of the Russian Federation. I was being driven home from spending a lot of time with my family during Christmas. You know, I was on the way home. I was being driven there after, I think I was up to like 5 a.m. So I was pretty tired. You know, I was, rubbing out the tinsel and sparkles of Christmas magic out of my eyes. I was trying to like fix my hair because it was a matted mess after partying with my family for so long. I was up till 5 a.m. for goodness sake. I was, trying to deal with this migraine I had gotten from rocking out with Santa's elves. And I started to scroll on Twitter. And it was 2 hours before the show was set to go live. And as I scrolled on Twitter, I stumbled upon a friend of mine, Patrick Hillsman, laughing at a tweet by Dmitry Medvedev, who's on screen right now. For those of you who don't know who Dmitry Medvedev is a close friend, confidant, and ally of Vladimir Putin, who also used to be prime minister and president of the Russian Federation. He was president for the brief period that Vladimir Putin wasn't president for constitutional reasons, before again becoming president again after Constitution makes a few nudge here, nudge there, whatever. You get the idea. Russia being Russia. Anyway, all you need to know, Dmitry Medvedev, very influential in Russian politics. Dmitry Medvedev, been a very big pro-war voice. Dmitry Medvedev, very close to Vladimir Putin. Dmitry Medvedev, former president of the Russian Federation. And I'm not talking about 20, 30 years ago. I'm talking about last 10 years. Okay. So, Dmitry Medvedev, you have an idea of who this guy is. He's not some joke. He's not some random Russian commentator on state TV that's saying wacky stuff to just pump full the Russian people full of propaganda and make them think, oh, the West is all trans, drag story hour, dragging your kids out and chopping off the genitals and throwing them into the gender confusion with the neo-Nazis and the Zionists and and all this nonsense. This is a respected, quote-unquote, Russian politician with influence, real political influence. And he has some New Year's predictions. Some predictions for the New Year's. Now, all of these are ridiculous to some extent, but some of them are way more ridiculous than others. And the reason we're going to be going through this is because I want to use this as an example, as a more of a narrative device to explain to you guys when I say that many in the Russian hierarchy, many in Russian politics, many in Russian society, just to be blunt, are, I don't know, under a spell or delusioned or just insane, cuckoo, whatever you want to use, whatever words you want to say. They are not in connected to reality about what is the reality on the ground when it comes to how bad Russian logistics are, how many soldiers they've lost, how corrupt the military is, how, to be quite frank, they cannot achieve their originally stated goals for this war. It's just not possible, and it would probably be better for them to cut their losses and leave. But for political reasons, you got to walk back from your conclusion, because it would look really bad if Putin just threw away 100,000 people just for, it to all be worthless. Nobody wants to be the president who threw tens of thousands of their own sons and daughters to die in a destructive war, not only for their nation states, youth who has fled the nation or been killed in the trenches, but also has been quite destructive for their national security, because Finland and Sweden are joining NATO now. NATO expansion is continuing. And, to be quite blunt, they've just failed on every level. So I wanted to read this to give you an idea of just how disconnected the Russian political elite is, or at least how disconnected they're trying to present themselves as. On New Year's Eve, everybody's into making predictions. Many come up with futuristic hypotheses, as if competing to single out the wildest, even the most absurd ones. Here's our humble contribution. What could happen in 2023? Number 1, oil prices will rise to $150 a barrel, and gas price will top $5,000 per 1,000 cubic meters. Number 2, the UK will rejoin the EU. And number 3, the EU will collapse after the UK's return. Euro will drop out of use as the former EU currency. So, already, we're a little off the rails. We've a little like, knocked ourselves off the track. We're already in cuckoo land. Every single one of these are not going to happen. The UK rejoining NATO in the next year is highly unlikely, definitely as the Conservatives are in office. Rishi Sunak is in office, and a big part of his base supports the Leave campaign. Doesn't really make political sense. And number 2, the UK rejoining the EU, causing some chaos to then make it collapse, is also pretty ridiculous. But these are just like, these are the more basic stuff. It gets much wilder than this. Let's keep going. This is already pretty wild. This is already completely out of touch. Let's keep going. Number 4, Poland and Hungary will occupy western regions of the formerly existing Ukraine. Poland and Hungary will occupy western regions of the formerly existing Ukraine. This would require Poland, a current NATO country, and Hungary, again, NATO country, to invade Ukraine and take its territory after Poland has sent how many tanks? How many rounds of ammunition? How much aid? Much more aid as a percentage of GDP than the vast majority of the countries that have sent it aid. I think it's in the top 5. Actually, it might be in the top 3 nations as of a percentage of GDP when it comes to total amount of aid sent. Definitely a ton of tanks. A lot of old Soviet tanks that Ukrainian crews are already trained on. They have the ammunition for. They're familiar with how to do the repairs. Even if they're just scrapping some of these tanks just for the parts to repair other tanks, that stuff has been extremely useful for the Ukrainian military, who needs these tanks, needs armor to launch these counteroffensives. Why would they give Ukraine hundreds of tanks only to then invade Ukraine? Why give them guns if a year later they're going to invade and fight them? It doesn't make any sense. Not to mention, Poland and Hungary are in NATO. NATO has coordinated how many meetings in supporting Ukrainian sovereignty and supporting the Ukrainian national defense against the Russian invasion? How many countries within NATO would be upset if Poland was to completely 180 on policy and say we're going to annex this territory? If Hungary was to do the same? This is cuckoo land. This is fantasy. This is something that only the very worst of the Polish far right believe in. And we're talking about like the neo-Nazis and white supremacist scum of the country. Because when I was in Poland and I was talking to Polish politicians, this wasn't on the mouth of anyone's tongue besides people who were talking about massacres that happened 80, 90 years ago to talk about why Ukrainian refugees deserve no sympathy. So I don't know how they're going to capture Poland in the next year and then invade Ukraine. Not only not send aid to Ukraine, but actually mount an invasion, and a successful invasion. A successful invasion. Hungary as well. At least Hungary's somewhat more believable. Still not believable. Let's continue. Number 5. The Fourth Reich will be created, encompassing the territory of Germany and its satellites, i.e. Poland, the Baltic states, Czechia, I think you say Czechoslovakia, Slovakia, Czechoslovakia, used to get, sorry, I played too many Hoi 4 games. The Kiev Republic, I guess that means like what is current day Ukraine, and other outcasts. The Fourth Reich. The Fourth Reich will be created, encompassing Poland, the Baltic states, Czechia, Slovakia, Kiev Republic, and yada, yada, yada. Others. I like how he says, and others, and gives no, elaboration, just said more will be annexed. There is no Fourth Reich. The Germans who believe in a Fourth Reich, I feel like a fucking moron actually even trying to explain this, but the Germans who believe in bringing back a new Reich are such a tiny minority. Tiny, so tiny. And the only prominence any of the people who actually want to bring back a new Reich have is the news reports recently of those people getting their houses raided by the German government because they were trying to plan terrorist attacks and possible coups by some weird LARPy German monarchist. The Bundeswehr, or whatever, not the Bundeswehr, but the Reichsbürger, I think is what they call their movement. The people who believe the Reich never ended. But even those people wouldn't call it the Fourth Reich. They would be bringing back a continuation of a separate Reich. Either way, silly, not going to happen. It's out of some weird alternative history, like YouTube video or weird fan fiction, or possibly a botched Hoi 4 game during Millennium Dawn. Like, again, completely fucking ridiculous, but again, this isn't anyone saying this. This is the former president of the Russian Federation. Bar, thanks for the bits. I can't believe I thanked you. After all we've been through in the last hour. YouTube viewers will have no clue what I mean. Number 6. War will break out between France and the Fourth Reich. Europe will be divided, and Poland will be repartitioned in the process. Number 7. Northern Ireland will separate from the UK and join the Republic of Ireland. That's the first one probably any of you guys in the audience are a little bit like, ooh, I'm excited about that. Maybe the rejoining of the EU, my British fans like that idea. Number 8. Civil war will break out in the United States, California, and Texas becomes an independent state as a result. Texas and Mexico will form an allied state. Elon Musk will win the presidential election, and a number of states which, after the new civil war ends, will have been given to the GOP. Number 9. All the largest stock markets and financial activity will leave the US and Europe and move to Asia. Number 10. The Bretton Woods system of monetary management will collapse, leading to the IMF and World Bank crash. Euro and dollar will stop circulating as a global reserve currency, and digital fiat currencies will be actively used instead. So, monetary system collapse, IMF collapse, all the stock markets of the world will leave and go to China and Japan, I assume, when he says Asia, maybe Korea. Civil war will break out. Texas will separate, make an alliance with Mexico for some reason. Elon Musk will be president of the now fractured United States, post-Civil War United States. I guess Elon Musk must be like a George MacArthur type figure, like a secret military genius who's going to be able to command the Tesla legions, working with maybe Boston Dynamics to form his new, like, Mars-faring robot army. A war breaks out between France and this mythical Fourth Reich. Northern Ireland, yada yada. A lot of nonsense. Invasions of Ukraine by Poland, Fourth Reich, whatever. So, I don't really know if anyone takes this seriously. I would assume basically no one takes this seriously. To be honest, even though I said that this is a reflection of, how disconnected the Russian government and Russian government officials are from the real world, I don't even think they believe 90 to 95% of the stuff that is in this. The Russian government has lied before to try to change public perception, and the Russian government will lie again in order to try to change and challenge public perception. What I do think this does indicate is that the Russian government is openly willing to have its, influential members, its representative members, make wild and bogus and insane claims about what the future of Europe and the world is going to look like in a post-war, environment, and just set it out there. Like, this is respectable to them. So let's say that they only believe 10% of this stuff, and they're saying all of this stuff to try to overcorrect for it. So therefore, if just one of this stuff lands, you can start to count some debt or cast some doubt. Or I think maybe an even more likely outcome would be, maybe if you just throw a million things at the wall at once, they can cause as much concern as possible in order to get Westerners like, Ah! Which, this wouldn't be the first time the Russian government has played into wild public conspiracy theories in order to try to garner the respect of conspiracy theorists and the people who are easily fooled on the internet. In fact, this was tweeted, in English. And if you guys want to know what that means, it means that this message was meant for an English audience. If you listen to, like, Russian state media, like what the Russian government is saying on domestic cable, versus what they say on, like, RT America or other, like, Russian propaganda outlets or networks that are meant for international audiences, the stuff they cover and talk about are completely different. You're going to hear a lot less dehumanization of Ukrainians and a lot more nonsense like this, right? Because they're trying to pick their audience, because you communicate different messages to, garner different audiences. And if Americans were to see how the Russian government talks about Ukrainians, they would be disgusted. They would get like memories of like more the colonial mindset of maybe the British Empire or the South African apartheid government or something along those lines, and it would make them uncomfortable. So they leave that out of international messaging, but they keep that domestic. And I think this is obviously meant for an international audience. I think this is meant to play into conspiracy theorists. I think this is meant to play into... I see somebody pointing out that this was on Russian Telegram first. True, but then he posted it in English, meaning that he also wanted Westerners to see it. I think this is meant as for a combination of trying to pump up the domestic audience to think that there's a future here. Because if Russia could achieve all of this, then from a national, like, security and strengthening Russia standpoint, the domestic Russian audience would think, wow, actually all of these horrific deaths of my family members, maybe they're worth it. Because this makes it sound like Russia is going to be the most powerful nation in the world. And that's the conclusion you could come away by reading this. So for the domestic Russian audience, plays like that. For the American audience, for the Western audience, maybe it can cause some concerns amongst the, more, how do I say, politically schizophrenic types that scour the internet. This is silly. I think it's a good demonstration that the Russians are not too interested in engaging in good faith negotiations or in touch with reality. And until they cut shit like this out, it's very hard to imagine us being able to negotiate a post-war European security structure with the Russians. This is silly. Dmitry Medvedev is silly. The Fourth Reich is silly. And all of this is silly. But, I guess on a dark level, so is this whole invasion and how botched it's been. So nothing new, I assume. Nothing new, I suppose.